by the late 60s, political movements had gotten kind of sour and were turning violent. There was the Chicago Democratic Convention that, went askew, and the assassination of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, and there were kind of student riots all over the world that year. And this whole dream of peace and love and, compassion was going out the window. And we thought, let's take it away from that context. Let's make a non-political event just to see if we can actually live, the life we were talking about living and relate to each other in kind of a better way. So the fact that it worked so well is very gratifying to me. The seeds for Woodstock grew out of Monterey Pop Festival, which inspired me and my friend Rico Barry to produce the Miami Pop Festival in 1968, which we did at Gulfstream Park, and we drew about 75,000 people over the 2 days. I left Florida, closed my shop, and moved to Woodstock, New York in 1968. Started managing a band that a friend of mine from Miami had formed called Train, and in trying to get them a record deal, I called Capitol Records and spoke to Artie Kornfeld, who was their head of A&R. He was the vice president of A&R. Turns out we were from the same neighborhood. We became instant friends and spent months just hanging out and talking about things. The summer of '68, I went to some festivals which took place pretty near here on a local farm, this woman Pam's farm, and she was producing things called soundouts. And soundouts were weekend concerts, really, out in the country, on her farm, under the stars. I think she charged $2 for parking, and talent was local. The local talent here was Van Morrison and Richie Havens, and just great bands. We had another project which was to build a recording studio here. I thought that, because so many bands were living here then, and really no place to record other than going to the cities, that it would be an inspirational kind of place for people to come and record. Artie's lawyer knew John Roberts and Joe Rosenman, and they were building a studio in Manhattan called Media Sound, and suggested we have a meeting about the studio.
We got contacted by these two guys from Woodstock, New York, who wanted to build a little recording studio in Woodstock, New York, kind of the size of the one that we had turned down.
And we did. We went up and met with them. They thought I was from Pluto. Artie they could sort of relate to. He was more in their style.
The relationship that I had with Michael is different from the relationship I had with Artie, even though Michael and Artie came to see us at the same time. My relationship, first and foremost, with my already existing partner, John, went back several years. John and I hung out, did a few other things together, a few smaller projects. We were writing a sitcom together. We did some traveling together. He was an adventurous guy. He loved adventure. We had one of those instant friendships. When we met, I think within 10 minutes we were best friends. And it stayed that way until he died in 2001. But they came to see us and we talked it over, and the plan was uninteresting. However, at the end of their proposal, right on the tail end of it, there was the description of the opening day of this studio in the woods that they were planning, at which they said Bob Dylan would appear. So I said, don't like the recording studio idea. However, if you can get Bob Dylan to come out of his house and do anything, why don't we just do a concert with Bob Dylan? Well, it'll be terrific. Since they knew that they probably would never be able to get Bob Dylan to take their calls, They resisted this change of plans.
Talking about all this stuff with Artie, I was thinking about maybe doing an extended, concert series up here, and then we talked about the festival, and it just, talking and dreaming and seeing what was going on in the country at the time, which was pretty chaotic. They asked us to come back with some budgets for what that would cost and what that would look like, and we said we would. And in the meantime, we had been talking to Larry Bell from Bell Records about funding the festival, and he was pretty interested in doing it. So we called them back and said, look, it doesn't look like it's going to work out. They seemed really disappointed, asked if there was some way we could make it work with them. And so Artie and I talked about it and decided if they would do both projects, then we would go with them.
Finally, because we had the financing and they didn't, they agreed, okay, we'll do a concert with Bob Dylan. And then we promised that with the proceeds of the concert, we would build their recording studio.
So we made a deal. They put up $500,000, $250,000 for the studio and $250,000 as seed for the festival. The four of us went off to produce Woodstock.
So it's a small town, even though the concert was not held in Woodstock, New York. The idea of Woodstock, it goes even further back because this town was always associated with creativity and was actually founded as an artist colony and was famous and infamous. That's why Dylan came here. His manager had a place here. Big Pink is a nickname for the house that became renowned due to musicians in the late 60s, both living and recording here. Bob Dylan and his then backup band, who became known as The Band, recorded the Basement tapes here in 1967. Upon the rising sands of time, and what a friend you carried through this life. I mean, I went to the original Woodstock. I was 15 years old. Somebody's mom drove us, one of my high school buds. We went in a car full of kids. We had our Boy Scout packs, and someone said, there's a concert. He said, oh, I'll drive you. And she drove us up through the traffic jam. Finally said, I'm letting you boys out. I'm not going to go anymore. She said, okay, see you later. Nobody really knew. There was no instant tweeting of what's going on. And so that concert was defined by that. I ended up not even staying for the whole time because I was so overwhelmed. I slept on the gravel under a table and hitchhiked back, my first time hitchhiking.
We parked on one side and we slept in the car, and on the other side was this pond. And all of a sudden, I think it was maybe late morning, this camera crew shows up, and there were people swimming in the pond nude and everything. So yeah, they showed up, and quite a large crew.
We had 50 people up there. We had 15 cameras. We had 50 magazines. We had assistants to the assistants. We had audio people. And everybody slept in the mud or on a piece of 4x8 plywood, or nobody had a hotel room. There was no food. There was no nothing. But there was an urgency on all of our part to capture the anthropology of it in addition to the music.
When we were there, we didn't really know what we were at, in my opinion. Everybody made this big deal about Woodstock, but at the time, we knew we were at a festival, and we knew there were a lot of people there, and it was all muddy and all that stuff, but we didn't really know what we were at.
There wasn't much time to be thinking about whether we were creating history at the time. Afterwards, looking back, yeah, I mean, it's a great feeling. I think if you plan to do something historical like that, probably it falls flat. We were so busy doing whatever it took to survive once we got the idea for the project that the history took care of itself, I guess.
This was the most astonishing gathering of people ever assembled in one place. You couldn't see the road, you couldn't on the freeways, you could not find your way. It was like a stream, it was like a river, it was like lemmings.
One rarely sees 500,000 people crammed in front of anything. And because we were in close touch with the state police about all of this, we knew that there were another 1.5 million people just outside the gates trying to get in. The state police further upstate told us that there were another 5 to 7 million people whom they were preventing from getting on the highways to come down and join the 2 million that were around the festival.
There were 1,000 problems every day, even leading up to it. We had the responsibility to help these people get through the weekend safely. That involves, restroom facilities and water and food and medical care, and when it went from 200,000 that we had built for to 500,000 or 600,000, all those things had to be stretched in incredibly interesting ways.
From my point of view, I had a lot of things to worry about at the event. I was the guy who had to find money for the bands, get helicopters to solve that problem, get our banker out of bed, get luck out with some cashier's checks that hadn't been locked in a time vault just by accident. And wild, miraculous stuff and one little crisis after another. I'm happy that I got through it alive. Behind the scenes, there was a lot to worry me. I don't think I slept for the entire 3 days.
They didn't have a very good time.
What was your time like then?
It was fantastic. It was everything that we dreamed about, but on steroids. I had a fantastic crew, that worked with me through the whole thing, and they were able to stretch and invent when the hordes descended, and everybody was so cooperative and shared everything, and the feeling on the ground, even amongst the people in the townspeople and the police and everybody, it was remarkable.
I was trying to get all the bands to extend their sets because I was hoping to have 24 hours continuous entertainment so that the kids would have something to do. The business managers, when I would call and say, can you play double sets, they would say, we're not playing any sets because we hear you're broke, which was more or less accurate. On a Saturday night, I managed to airlift some cash, enough cash in to get the Grateful Dead and the Who to go on stage. When I got that cash and I put it in my backpack, it was around midnight. It was a nice night. I had a motorcycle that I got around the side. I had the cash in my backpack. I was making my way up toward the stage. Janis Joplin was on stage. It was brightly lighted. She was in great form. It was perfect. Everything was perfect. I was solving this problem, and we were going to have continuous entertainment, and the music was perfect. And I was finally seeing an act, actually seeing entertainment, because most of the time I hadn't had a chance to. I loved that moment. It was my favorite moment.
The 1960s were fucked up. We had 4 assassinations. We had the women's movement, civil rights marches had been going on since the late 50s. People were being killed left and right. Blacks were being lynched still. People were being denied their rights. Vietnam was going on. Nixon had been elected. He was supposed to end the Vietnam War. LBJ had dropped out. Hubert Humphrey was inept. Nixon was a liar. Everybody wanted a place to find what Michael was calling peace and music.
When I was about 10 or 11 years old, we had to do air raid drills here when Khrushchev was threatening, North America. But it was, had to fight the commies. That's that was the feeling.
It's spooky how similar, some of those things are. What was going on under Nixon and what's going on now under Trump. Just sort of the state of the world. It seems like we're moving backwards. And there also seems to be an energy out there of people willing to get involved and, make themselves heard.
Across the entire world, thousands of people nationwide.
I still have a dream.
North Korea is issuing a new threat of military action against the U.S.
Together, we will make America great again.
This is our summons to greatness.
Vladimir Putin
and his unstoppable nuclear-powered missile.
Students, parents, teachers, and community members are asking some hard questions tonight about last week's shooting in South Florida.
Enough is enough! Enough is enough! No more violence! End gun violence!
Maybe I discovered it at Woodstock. I don't know if I thought about it too much before then. But I found that people fundamentally don't want anger and selfishness as their frame of reference, or their ground of being in their relationships. They want love and sharing and community as their frame of reference. So with that hunger or that yearning inherent in people everywhere, it seems to me that the setting's always right for another festival of this kind.
So what would you say the update would be on the Woodstock 2019?
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure it's going to happen.
That's